miss me?
So, back in 1996, Scream became one of the most iconic slasher films simply because Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson did what an entire decade of horror films failed to do. With the release of Scream, they found a way to attract hardcore fans of the genre while revitalizing the interest of a new generation at a time when many felt slashers had become stagnant. The 90s horror flick community were already in a dry spell when it came to iconic monsters, mind-bending plot twists, or any blockbuster franchises with any out-of-the-box motives or killing methods. I mean, sure, Silence of the Lambs made quite the history by winning the Best Picture Oscar and sweeping the Big Five awards, and even Ghostface's debut in Scream shook up the entire horror scene with its fresh take on the genre's tropes. But despite these highlights, many still view the 90s as a step down from the glory days of the 80s, which were very accurately termed as the golden age for horror. Of course, following up on that kind of success ain't easy. But does that mean the 90s were truly terrible for the slasher scene? I'd like to respectfully disagree, and in my plea to cleanse the 1990s of its bad rap, here are 18 underrated slashers from that decade which I believe are worth revisiting. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Psycho 4: The Beginning, 1990. So this film was a rare decision made by Universal Television, which was the TV branch of the studio. The only reason Psycho 4: The Beginning came into production was to celebrate and honor the 30th anniversary of Alfred Hitchcock's original film. Apparently, the original scriptwriter from Hitchcock's Psycho even collaborated with the director of this film. Psycho 4 didn't deviate from the OG film's idea and focused mostly on Norman's emotional struggle. We get to have a peek into the early days of the Bates Motel, and also how troubled the Bates family really was, which ultimately fueled Norman's descent into emotional chaos. As an adult, Norman Bates once heard a radio show which discussed serial killers, and strangely enough, he decided to call the show and explain how the mind of a serial killer really works. Through many flashbacks, we see Norman's childhood and teenage years, allowing us to really get a grasp on how he turned into a nightmare for every person who made the mistake of checking into the Bates Motel. Now, you have to understand that Psycho 4: The Beginning was actually made to explore the concept of the original film in TV form, but most importantly, the film dug into the core of Norman's trauma. Sure, it had its campy moments, but as soon as the movie picks up its somber tone, you get to see how beautifully layered the premise is, while retaining a Hitchcock-esque essence to it.
Say it!
Nightbreed, 1990. I personally think Clive Barker is one of those rare gems who's got the talent to translate his work so beautifully from the pages of his novels to the screen. In many ways, Nightbreed was ahead of its time, and it's low-key sad how it never received its due recognition. In the film, we see the main character, Aaron Boone, struggling with his haunting nightmares, which eventually leads him to seek help through psychotherapy. However, it's not too late before he begins to connect the dots on all the murders happening around him, because most of these ritualistic murders somehow bear a striking resemblance to his dreams. Things only get worse when Aaron's doctor tricks him into taking unconventional medication, and he begins to uncover a new world brimming with mythical monsters which only existed in folklore. I loved how Barker truly focused on using literal monsters to explore deeper themes of marginalization in the film, as we see how the outcasts are driven to save themselves as they can't trust anyone in society, be it the doctors or the cops. I think Nightbreed is a prime example of one of those 90s films that fell victim to studio meddling, both in its marketing and final editing. Clive Barker had consistently emphasized on how important the fantasy elements are in his story, but unfortunately, the theatrical release didn't fully embrace this aspect and went on to discard it. If you decide to watch this film, please find the director's cut, which is really the superior version, given that the studio completely screwed up the integrity of the plot by making a few confusing cuts. In truth, the film is a tribute to the extent of Barker's vision and his skill in translating his written work into a cinematic experience. It goes beyond being just a typical slasher movie and reinvigorates the concept of folk horror by adding slight touches of superhero culture. Nightbreed is wildly inventive because it's a fun slasher meets horror concept, but with obvious notes on the terrors of colonialism. Bride of Chucky, 1998. In 1998, Bride of Chucky not only mapped Jennifer Tilly to the horror icon status, but also paved the way for Don Mancini's franchise to explore more comedic and boldly queer themes. Marketed as the outcome of a twisted version of natural-born serial killers stuck inside killer dolls, the film absolutely reveled in flipping its audiences from predicting what's about to come their way. 7 years after Chucky's defeat at the hands of a teenage Andy Barclay, his remains are tracked down by Tiffany Valentine, who was once Charles Lee Ray's accomplice and lover. Tiffany successfully restores a decent version of Chucky, who is of course ungrateful for her efforts. So, to seek revenge, Chucky traps her soul inside a doll that looks like him. Throughout The Bride of Chucky, we see both Chucky and Tiffany constantly trying to transfer their souls into human bodies, but not all seemingly compatible couples make a good team, you know? Unlike all the previous installments, in this film, we see how Chucky is no longer in complete control and can't simply murder his way out of conflicts. Even today, Bride of Chucky maintains its darkly humorous charm and offers an undoubtedly sinister yet entertaining experience. If you're a fan of the killer duos from Scream, I'm sure you'll appreciate the film's blend of sadistic moments and self-aware humor. Bride of Chucky takes a comedic turn, infusing the franchise with humor while maintaining its signature horror and gore elements, adding a perfect balance to Chucky's eternal quest for a human body. Plus, introducing Tiffany through Jennifer Tilly's performance really amplified the comedic element, making the film an unexpectedly enjoyable and entertaining return to form. While it's undeniably campy, Bride of Chucky efficiently executes its concept well, forever changing the fate of this franchise. Halloween H2O, 20 years later, 1998. So in order to grasp the storyline of Halloween H2O 20 years later, it's crucial to know its place in the Michael Myers timeline. Following Halloween 2, which ended with the explosion of the Haddonfield Memorial Hospital, Laurie fakes her death and adopts a new identity as Carrie Tate, who is now the mother of a rebellious teenager. Almost 2 decades after the original events, Michael has again resurfaced, and after discovering Laurie's new identity, he travels to California with the intent of ending his sister's life once and for all. And yep, in this segment of the timeline, they are still portrayed as siblings. The franchise was going through quite the rut with its lame-ass sequels, which kept expanding on the Michael Myers lore, only to further confuse the new fans. So Dimension Films brought in Kevin Williamson to kickstart the franchise for the future, and what we got was a true homage to the original story. This movie was undoubtedly a successful reboot for rekindling the decade's interest in the concept of Halloween. Despite the limited involvement from John Carpenter and all the elaborate conflicts with Jamie Lee Curtis, the production of the film was not impacted. In fact, Halloween H2O 20 years later turned out to be a highly anticipated sequel in a franchise that struggled to have any form of credibility until then. I think a part of its success should go to Williamson, who refined the entire script. But sadly, he remained uncredited, even if his contribution was quite obvious. However, any traction the franchise had gained was quickly fizzled out after the release of Halloween Resurrection, which is widely regarded as one of the worst horror sequels in history.
I haven't discharged you!
Dr. Giggles, 1992. So this film documents the story of Evan Rendell Jr., a clinically insane man who ran away from a mental institution and is now hell-bent on carrying out the crazy killing rampage that his father had begun almost 30 years ago. Dr. Evan Rendell, his father, was a notorious serial killer who was obsessed with finding a heart that would be perfect for his dead wife. So he killed all his patients and carved their hearts out to see if it could be a perfect match. Now, on a similar note, Evan Jr. is fixated on a teenager with a fatal heart condition, who has lost all hopes of finding a suitable donor. While Dr. Giggles was never really aiming for any awards, it did deliver more than you would expect on the essentials of a slasher flick. It had intense and graphic violence, a quirky title that suited its silly tone, and of course, a memorable villain who had made quite the name for himself in the B-grade movie industry. Sure, it never received any glowing reviews, but looking back, Dr. Giggles was fun to watch, especially if you're looking for mindless entertainment in the genre. So if you're in the mood for some classic turn-off-your-brain kind of fun, Dr. Giggles might be worth your time.
Miss me?
New Nightmare, 1994. Now this pick might not come as a shock for the hardcore fans, but in case you didn't know, Wes Craven's New Nightmare walked in this decade just so Scream could run. After the creation of one of horror's most iconic villains, Freddy Krueger, and witnessing the rise of a franchise that had a devoted fan following around this central character, Craven simply embraced a meta-perspective throughout the Nightmare on Elm Street series. This meta-slasher introduces us to Heather Langenkamp, the actress behind Nancy in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. We see her navigating her interactions with a Freddy-obsessed fanbase and how she faces many challenges on set because of it. This gave the film a sort of reality TV series vibe before the concept became the cultural phenomenon we are all so familiar with now. Of course, the twist comes in when Freddy finds a way to transition from Heather's dreams into reality, forcing her to confront him just like her character Nancy did before in the film. I do understand how labeling any of the iconic Nightmare on Elm Street films as underrated might appear a bit exaggerated, but there are several entries in the series that people have barely even heard of, and New Nightmare is one of them. Through this film, Craven examines his most iconic creation through the perspective of an audience, only to push it towards its pinnacle, and this is exactly what he excelled at while launching the Scream franchise, thus making this one an essential precursor. This is easily one of the most out-of-the-box, self-referential horror films of the decade, which was a distinctive commentary on the genre. Disturbing Behavior, 1998. If you're a fan of classic high school movie tropes where a social outcast navigates the different cliques at school, this movie might just be something up your alley. I mean, a bunch of murder-thirsty jocks are being mind-controlled by something like Elon Musk's Neuralink implants. What's not to like? Sadly, this film was also a victim of studio interference and received a lukewarm response, especially because director David Nutter's original 103-minute cut was trimmed down to just 83 minutes after the test screenings. But even after this, Nutter managed to infuse the film with an effectively eerie atmosphere that complements its themes. Disturbing Behavior was inspired from Ira Levin's renowned novel The Stepford Wives and narrows in on James Marsden's character Steve, a high schooler who moves to the peaceful town of Cradle Bay. There, he soon becomes suspicious of a school program that transforms rebellious teens into robot-like exemplars of ideal behavior. Not just that, these brain implants also affected their sex drive because every time these teens got horny, they got violent. While there isn't a traditional serial killer in Disturbing Behavior, the film is packed with murder and teenage angst, which is more than enough to quell your slasher cravings. This was also a commentary on the prevalent pharmaceutical-driven parenting practices during a time when many were grappling with ADHD issues. While it's not flawless, Disturbing Behavior excels in depicting the self-consciousness and complexity of high school life. Moreover, it bravely challenges the dangers of conforming to societal norms. Similar to Scream's portrayal of Woodsboro, Cradle Bay in this film is full of hidden dangers and unsettling truths, which can be terrifying for teenagers navigating a world where trust is scarce. Maniac Cop 2, 1990. This slasher flick was a coherent sequel to the B-movie that kicked off the series. Screenwriter Larry Cohn and director William Lustig collaborated to craft this beautiful film that followed Matthew Cordell, who is operating in full zombie mode as he is now a relentless killing machine on an unstoppable rampage. His reign of terror later intertwines with the brutal acts of Stephen Turkel, another serial killer whose motives seem to align with Cordell's violent spree. Eventually, justice catches up, and Cordell is presumed to have met his end. But as history has shown us, things may not be as final as they seem. Maniac Cop 2 stands out as a fine example of a sequel that outshines its predecessor in every aspect. It's impossible not to highlight the improvements this film brings compared to Maniac Cop. This one has superior stunts with a much more sensible storyline, heightened scares, and of course, Robert Davi's standout performance as the hero. Moreover, it excels as a standalone slasher flick with many quick-witted kills and a severely underrated villain portrayed by Robert Z'Dar in his iconic role.
I want me gold now! Oh God, no!
Leprechaun, 1993. A common misconception among the crowd in the 90s was how this film was intended to be frightening. Seriously? Do you really believe that a movie about a killer leprechaun was designed to scare you? Sadly, many people of that decade were unfamiliar with the concept of horror comedy. So here's the truth. No, this movie isn't meant to terrify you. It solely aims to entertain you, and it accomplishes that goal wonderfully. Leprechaun is set in North Carolina and follows Dan O'Grady, who returns from Ireland after tricking the leprechaun and stealing his gold coins. However, the leprechaun follows him and kills his wife. Later, Dan manages to trap the leprechaun in a box in the basement with a 4-leaf clover placed on top. But before he can set the house on fire, Dan has a heart attack. Then we fast forward to 10 years later, when J.D. Redding buys the rundown house at a bargain price and moves from Los Angeles with his daughter, Tori Redding. Hoping to renovate it, he hires a 3-man team to paint the house. One day, while one of these men were exploring the basement, he accidentally removed the clover from the box, freeing the mischievous creature, and thus began the leprechaun's crime spree to retrieve his 100 golden coins. I love how the characters in the film approach their predicament with such seriousness, even though they're dealing with something as absurd as a killer leprechaun. If you want a perfect blend of comedy, gore, and fun, Leprechaun ticks all the boxes. Sleepy Hollow, 1999. So Sleepy Hollow follows Constable Ichabod Crane as he's dispatched from the city to the town of Sleepy Hollow to investigate a series of late 1700s murders. Now, Crane is a skeptical and science-focused policeman who's convinced there must be a rational explanation for the peculiar beheadings. However, the locals blame these mysterious killings to be the work of a ghost. As Crane tries his best to use all his investigative methods to uncover this killer, he soon confronts the Headless Horseman astride his black steed, and this guy comes with a clear agenda that won't rest until it's fulfilled. Certainly, Sleepy Hollow isn't typically the first film that comes to mind when discussing the slasher subgenre of horror. However, Burton's gothic rendition of the classic tale adheres to nearly every rule in the slasher villain playbook. I think this one stands as one of Burton's most underappreciated works, digging deep into horror while remaining true to the director's iconic, family-friendly, and quirky filmmaking style. Wishmaster, 1997. Wishmaster follows an ancient djinn who is imprisoned in a jewel for centuries until an accidental release unleashes havoc. This djinn wants to capture a girl named Alex's soul, who somehow uses her wit to evade his clutches. But it's not long before Alex witnesses the wrath of this ancient entity. The djinn can grant any wish with unforeseen consequences. While technically it's quite impressive, Wishmaster's intelligence doesn't fully translate into the final film, which unexpectedly spawned a whole franchise. Despite being marketed as a Wes Craven film, Wishmaster wasn't actually directed by him. In fact, even his creative influence isn't strongly felt throughout the movie. Nevertheless, Wishmaster serves as a guilty pleasure for many 90s slasher enthusiasts who appreciate its campy charm, entertainingly wicked villain, and prominent practical effects amidst the other easy-to-forget CGI sequences of that era. Urban Legend, 1998. Urban Legend is often labeled as a B-horror film riding on the coattails of the Scream craze, only with a much more simplistic script. While the characters may not be deeply developed, this teen slasher is commendable solely for its inventive kills. Drawing on folklore for inspiration, Urban Legend shocked the 90s with its unexpected and diverse range of deadly encounters. It's basically about college students grappling with a string of murders mirroring the well-known urban legends. Natalie Simon finds herself at the heart of the story as her friends fall victim to these brutal slashes, leaving her as the last one standing. Little does she realize, the killer might be someone much closer than she suspects. While it adheres to typical slasher tropes, Urban Legend stands out as more than just a standard iteration of the subgenre. With Wes Craven's seminal work and the found footage genre hogging all the range, Urban Legend is often overlooked in the 90s horror film catalog. But I think it's a fun watch, especially if you love to see teenage victims on the grinder alongside great set pieces that will pry a few scares out of you. Plus, the urban legends explored in this film left people so curious that they literally ran to research them during a still-developing internet of that era. Despite being labeled as a Scream copycat, Urban Legend comes nowhere close, as it maintains a consistent tone throughout, avoids leaning into humor, and kicks off with an amazing opening scene that is quite credible even today. Cherry Falls, 1999. Largely ignored upon its initial release, Cherry Falls faced the brunt of censorship in the United States as the MPAA rejected multiple edits of the film, which resulted in its release as a television movie, despite enjoying a theatrical run in other countries. It's truly disappointing, given the darkly comedic and satirical tone present in the final product of Cherry Falls. This movie cuts through the same stagnant slasher trope and fixates on a murderer with a knack for killing innocent high school virgins. Imagine when high school becomes a race on being deflowered just so it could save your life. The film follows an introverted Jody Markin living in the town of Cherry Falls. Sadly, this town is haunted by a killer who's only targeting virgins, and so Jody's dad, who is a sheriff, decides to start a campaign where all town teens line up to lose their virginity till the killer is caught. I mean, yeah, sure, that's one way to solve the problem. This film is easily one of Brittany Murphy's best works, as she fills in the shoes for a meek virgin teen with a gruffy cop father. I think Cherry Falls is easily one of the most underrated slashers of this era, simply because of its fresh take on horror comedy alongside Scream's self-referential tone. And for those people who are ready to throw in their punches in the comments by calling Cherry Falls a 2000s film, this film actually premiered in France in 1999 and screened in the US a year later. Popcorn, 1991. Popcorn follows the life of Maggie Butler, who dreams of becoming a filmmaker. She's possibly the most passionate student in her film class and envisions hosting a film festival to raise funds. But Maggie's mind is constantly plagued with nightmares she can't explain. As her class prepares for the upcoming horror film festival at the Dreamland Theater, Maggie's nightmares start to manifest into reality. What initially seems like a fun opportunity to indulge in classic, gimmicky films quickly descends into absolute chaos as bodies begin to pile up. The culprit behind this massacre is a villain with a unique talent for creating and wearing masks. Popcorn is a forgotten gem from the 90s B-movie scene. While some horror enthusiasts recall it fondly, many have overlooked its existence because they simply failed to resonate with the film's core horror comedy approach. But any good slasher focuses on its campy kills, and Popcorn simply aces it. Popcorn isn't just about Maggie discovering her own identity. It's also about the true intentions of the killer. Through its innovative film-within-a-film concept, Popcorn is an homage to the slasher films of the 80s while carving out its own distinct identity in the 90s horror scene. Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, 1990. Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 pretty much transports you back to the heart of Texas, where, despite the lessons learned from previous films, unsuspecting travelers continue to pass through the morbid place. This time, it's Michelle and Ryan who are up on the chopping block as they eventually become Leatherface's prey and are hunted by the rest of the Sawyer family. Ultimately, the couple falls into their clutches and have a first-hand experience of the twisted dynamics of Texas's notorious family, which is now being led by a young Viggo Mortensen. Sure, Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 may not have achieved the same level of success as its predecessors, but it still serves as a solid expansion of the legendary Sawyer family who were introduced in the earlier installments. In this sequel, you get to see the deliberate effort to humanize Leatherface, offering him more screen time in order to explore his vulnerability and sentience. This shift in focus makes the latter part of the film, particularly when Michelle encounters the Sawyers, a gripping and unsettling sequence that becomes the highlight of the entire movie. Silent Night, Deadly Night 4, Initiation, 1990. If you've watched the first 3 films, let me tell you that Silent Night, Deadly Night 4, Initiation is nothing like you imagine. It diverges significantly from the expectations set by the previous 3 films in the franchise, as Brian Yuzna, a newcomer to the series, took a bold approach by twisting the franchise's core concept into something entirely different. The film follows Kim Levitt, an investigative reporter, as she immerses herself into the case of a woman found partially burned on the sidewalk. However, as Kim digs deeper into the conspiracy, she uncovers more clues suggesting the involvement of a coven of witches. This movie takes a U-turn from the traditional slasher formula and delves into a fascinating storyline centered around witches, incorporating Kafkaesque themes that align with Yuzna's distinct style and imagery. Strangeland, 1998. Dee Snider's Strangeland follows the story of a police officer named Mike Gage, whose daughter falls into the trap of a creep she meets online. And this isn't your normal catfishing gimmick. This creep goes by the name of Captain Howdy, who's obsessed with pain and body art. Howdy is actually a serial killer who delights in torturing the victims he scores online. Despite being captured, Captain Howdy evades justice through an insanity plea and resumes his killing spree by capturing and tormenting innocent victims. Apart from writing the film's screenplay, Dee Snider also portrays the menacing Captain Howdy in Strangeland. While Snider's transition from rocker to actor didn't really create any significant waves in the industry, the movie itself documents an era of emerging chat rooms during the internet's early days. Unlike typical stories featuring an invincible villain, Strangeland opts for a different approach, showcasing performances that, while not exceptional, carry the film's exploration of counterculture, albeit in a somewhat underdeveloped manner. The Dentist, 1996. So Brian Yuzna's slasher film The Dentist follows Dr. Alan Feinstein, a successful dentist in Los Angeles. However, his life takes a dark turn when he finds out about his wife's infidelity on their anniversary. Rather than reacting explosively, Feinstein begins to experience hallucinations while he's working with patients, and these hallucinations lead him to act out violently, harming his patients using his dental techniques. Feinstein's descent into madness forms the core of the film's unsettling premise as he struggles to get a grasp on reality. The Dentist is truly a gory spectacle, while being a wild ride from its era. You'll be able to fully appreciate this film only if you're willing to let go of all pretenses while embracing its lack of storytelling boundaries and witness the downfall of a man in a profession where patients are inherently vulnerable. If nothing, Feinstein spiraling out of control and unleashing utter chaos in a patient's mouth is guaranteed to make you squirm in your seat. So that's our list of the top 18 underrated slasher flicks from the 90s that you must check out. I'm not saying all of them are top-rated awesome, but believe me when I say this, the world has hyped up films 10 times worse than the ones in this list. Now, don't be shy. Go and give these films a try. But before you go, drop the name of your favorite horror flick from the 90s in the comments box below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.